Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster podcast, episode 116. I'm your host, Ronnie Moore. My co-host is always Jessie. And the Inside Bassmaster podcast is presented by Black Rifle Coffee Company. We're excited to partner with them going forward. I guess this is the second episode, Kyle, that we've been partnered with them, but excited to do this month's Pattern of the Month segment with none other than John Cox. And Kyle, it's hard to think, or when you think of anglers that are good, February, March, April, honestly, you'd expect maybe Greg Hackney's name to pop in your head and John Cox. Those are the two guys you expect to be near the top of the Angler of the Year standings after the first few events of the season.
Yeah, and the top of percentage-wise in fantasy fishing. You can't even justify picking John Cox because he's always picked at 90% or something crazy like that in fantasy fishing. But no, absolutely. As far as this time of year goes, you're talking about spawn, fringe of spawn, pre-spawn. It seems like John Cox is at the top of the leaderboard pretty much any time those things are in play.
So, John, my first question is, I always like to ask this off the top, is when you think of the month of March, what's your mindset? Because our first few elites are right there, right before March starts, and then we have the Classic in March, but it's always northern. But the fish, March just feels like a time. It's 70 degrees in Arkansas right now. It feels like everything's starting to happen, but sometimes it can make fish, freak out in a weird way. So what is your mindset when you hear March fishing?
It's like you said, it's kind of hard. We go from our first two events, full on spawn, down, in Florida and stuff, to almost, where it's borderline, where if we get, a couple 80 degree days, you get a push of fish come up, you get some spawning happening in March. But for the most part, you got some like severe cold fronts. Like I've already looked at the weather coming up for the Classic and stuff. And it looks like it's going to be, it's going to be kind of cold, and a little bit cooling down, and stuff could change. But so it's pretty much, I feel like that pre-spawn, where, it's not going to be, throwing the general around and seeing them, I feel like it's going to be more of, winding something.
So one thing I was going to ask you, like when you go into a tournament, like you mentioned, where you kind of head back north and you think in the back of your mind, there's a chance there's going to be some fish on beds. But in your mind, there's probably still some pre-spawners. Like when you start practice, like what is your mindset? Are you saying I'm going to try to catch those ones that are the furthest along and then back off to the pre-spawners? Or are you trying to catch the pre-spawners first and then like decide if you need to go fish for fish that are further along? Like what is your original mindset? Because I feel like that's a huge part of having success as a bed fisherman. It seems
right.
Like dedicating some time to do it.
Right. Yeah. And I try to stay as open as I possibly can be, like last week, the water was freezing cold, but I caught some fish off the beds, and I think it was in Georgia or South Carolina or wherever it was. So it was already happening, and it was happening really fast. So I really just, I base it on what the weather looks like for the week, and try to make my game plan and practice kind of on the weather. If it looks like we're going to have like super low lows, in the 40s, 30s, or if we got a lot of rain where we're going to see a lot of fluctuation up and down with the lake, I'm not going to lean towards those spawners, and I'm going to go more, just pre-spawn fish.
It seems like at your event last week at Clarks Hill and at the Bassmaster Open at Lake Eufaula, this spring is so weird because it's been 80 degrees and the nights haven't been cool and the water temps in the mid 70s, but there's, Drew Cook caught like all of his fish in the open off bed and he caught like 11, like he caught 5 one day, 6 the next day. Like, like they're like the water temps in the mid 70s though. And if you're from out of town and you roll up to that lake, you're like, man, it's full blown spawn. I thought, 62 is the magic number and we're at 74, yet there's probably a lot less fish on there compared to other years where maybe it's 64 degrees. And there's a whole wave up there. How do you balance that as a shallow fisherman, knowing that they want to be there and it says they should be there, but they're not, half a wave has maybe made it.
Right. And that's honestly, it's just been a weird year. And that, a perfect example was Seminole. We got there, everything was looking perfect, warming up, everything. And man, I tried to do the bed fishing thing for so long, day one, and I had like one fish, at noon. And I had to go cast for those pre-spawn, even some of those fish that were already garden fry from those few waves that came in. And man, it's just a strange year. And I feel like you almost, that's how you almost have to take it day by day, year by year, because you really don't know how they're going to act for that season. And it seems like if you can pick up on it quick, like, hey, something's not happening, females aren't coming in, and adjust, you can still kind of hang in there in the tournament.
So I just want to talk about like spawning theories in general. So I kind of take an old man approach at this, which is different in the sense that I have a theory that, at least like where I'm from in Central Arkansas, the biggest wave of the spawn happens the same time every year, no matter what the weather is. If it's super warm spring, super late spring, it almost seems to happen all the time. Do you think that is the case most places, or does it just solely dictate based on weather, water temperature, things of that nature? Do you think the fish are conditioned lake to lake to kind of spawn in a certain time?
Right. I do think it changes from lake to lake we go to. I know a lot of times I've been to lakes that might be drawn down. For instance, Clark's Hill last week, the water, they pulled it down a few feet. And I feel like that really kept a big push of fish going up like they wanted to. You saw some pretty big roamers, but they were really wanting that water to get in those bushes, for that prime spawning area. And I think it does. I think there's just so many variables that really help that big spawn. But like, for instance, like a beaver lake, something like that, I have seen it where they, or a table rock. I mean, they come up, they're there for a week, and they seem like they all do it at one time and then back out to deep water, So so it really varies on where we're at and stuff. And that's something that really interests me all the time, is how trying to put those pieces together of the spawn and trying to and see it different every year. And and sometimes it happens where it's like, oh, I remember a year just like this, and that's usually when we get a little more dialed in and do really well.
Do you believe, are you a moon watcher in terms of there's guys, they've had multiple moons down in Florida since Thanksgiving, and that's when you could see the first spawners at Okeechobee probably Thanksgiving or whatever, and then progressively more and more waves come, but they'll still spawn all the way until late May, just like they do everywhere else in the country. So my thought is, do you look at full moons as a positive for bed fishing? New moons, how do they differ for you? Obviously, in conjunction with warm weather, if you have a full moon and it's 40 degrees and the new moon's on 80 degrees, it could be different. But what do you feel? Because the same thing with the moons make deer move, in the fall and the winter, and a lot of hunters understand that. I don't hunt, but how do you feel the moons interact with the bass in terms of like we're coming into one or going out of one?
Right. What I really think, I don't know if it's 100% right, because I'm just a fisherman. I just fish all the time. But I really believe those clear nights with more light, full moon, or just, clear, something where I feel like they can almost see better. You see a lot more movement. Like on a full moon, clear night, you go out the next morning, you're like, oh my gosh, where'd all these fish come from? Compared to if you got a full moon and a really cloudy night, you just don't see the movement as much, as you do on those really bright, clear nights. And I think, I've noticed it even when it's not been a full moon, and it's just been a really clear night, and it's kind of, kind of bright out, and I just see so much more movement the next day.
So if we were in the parking lot of one of those hole in the wall motels you stay at, would we see you at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. going out to check to see if there's clouds?
Yeah, that's me checking,
Checking on your boat and checking on the clouds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Going back to kind of the theories, I'm getting a kick out of this, because this almost seems like we're interrogating John more than we're interviewing him, because just getting
we want to know,
because I just want to know personally more than anything, and I hope
where were you during the spawn?
Yeah.
But one thing I was going to ask, I think, I hear this theory a lot, and I couldn't prove it, so I'm curious to like your opinion on this. A lot of people say that, the first wave of the spawn, or the first time you get those fish moving up to spawn, that's when your biggest fish will come. Do you feel like that's true, or is that another one of those scenarios where it varies lake to lake?
Well, I do notice, I think what happens is those first waves that come in, they're usually a lot more full of eggs, they're a lot fatter. That's normally, even when I was doing guide trips, you catch a lot of your 10-pounders in the beginning of it, just because they're so full of eggs and stuff. And as the spawn progressively goes on throughout the year, you get a lot of those fish, I think, come back and do it again, and they just don't fill up as much eggs, they don't get those giant bellies on them like they do the first few waves. So yeah, that same fish that might weigh 10.5 in the beginning of the spawn might spawn again a month, 2 months later, isn't going to be a 10, it's going to be like a 9 something, so I think it's a lot of it's the same fish, but I think it's the, they just weigh a little more in those first few waves.
Sure.
So we know, obviously, I think I know the answer to this, but fans at home might not. I have decent eyes, like I love sight fishing. I've gotten, college top 10 sight fishing. I love it, but I still rely on white when I'm sight fishing. I like the color white. It's easy for me to make sure they don't get foul hooked. But I know, as the sight fishermen like Drew Cook, like yourself, Drew Benton, I rarely see white. And I know that there's a reason for that. Obviously, you can get away with other natural colors, but have you seen a big difference in some of those 10 or 8, 9, 10, 11 pounders that you've caught off bed that have maybe seen a bunch of white? Or do you feel like that natural is like the ticket for it? Or kind of, I guess, give me the back and forth on that.
Yeah, I know. I don't really know. I've never even, in my younger years, I don't really remember using white much at all. I know a lot of people are like, make sure they got it. And it honestly could have cost me some, because I mean, I've had some fish that I know picked it up and I just didn't know or didn't feel it where I would have saw them. But my whole theory behind it is I wait for that bite and I want that fish to move. I want it to turn. I don't want it to just sit there looking at me when I set the hook on it. And it happens a lot. So I mean, even the other day, like I had one that it would eat it and would just look at me and then spit it out. And I was just like, come on, please swim off the bed. And I ended up putting pressure on her, just pulled back a little bit, put some pressure, and she swam to the left. And I was like, I got you, and I hooked her good, and because a lot of times those ones facing you and stuff, they'll eat it, and then you'll set the hook and you'll end up losing them. They just barely won't have it. But yeah, I don't know. I just never really got into the whole white thing. I know some of the best sight fishermen, that's what they've used. I mean, maybe one of these days I'll pull out more whites, baits and do that. But I mean, it's working so far. So I just kind of go with the natural stuff.
So with that, what are the natural stuff? I mean, obviously there's probably a base color, and then you kind of vary off of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really use a ton of different colors. I use the general and like baby bass, and then I like a green pumpkin, watermelon that they make in it, and then my dark colors I'll just use black or a June bug, and then I keep it really simple. And I think too, the other thing, the stuff I bed fish with, like the general, the jerk shad, I can
Other
throw
crawl
that.
types, yeah.
Yeah, crawl. I can throw it while I'm fishing. Like it's not something like, I feel like if I'm fishing, I'm not going to just throw a white one while I'm fishing. So a lot of times I'm fishing with those same baits, looking for beds. And I think that's why I kind of go with more natural colors, is because that's what I'm searching. Trying to pick up a random one while I'm looking.
I've always wondered this, and I've always had, once again, we go back to theories here. I'm just picking your brain, but
yeah.
I've almost felt like the ability to look at sight fish and like be good at that. Some guys are good at it, some guys are just naturally not good at it. It seems like that's something you're either just born with or you're not. Like you're either a 5-star athlete or you're not. Like you can either see them on bed or you just can't. Like, have you been with people that are like, good fishermen that just can't see them the same way? Like, seems like I go with guys that are good sight fishermen and be like, yeah, you see that one over there? And you're like, no, I don't see that one there. Like, have you experienced
Yeah.
Have you experienced that with guys that are just not good at looking at it?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, a lot of it, I think, a lot of it's like, it might even be in my head where I might just mentally think I'm seeing something, and it might be a log, it might be a rock down there. And I think that's what it is. It's the whole, a lot of times you get bits and pieces of it. You're not visually just seeing a fish laying there. But I don't know. It's something, it's like my most favorite thing. Like I love it so much. Like that's the whole reason I love fishing, is because, pretty much because of the spawn. And it's just, when it's happening, I can just so focus on that, because I don't know, I almost forget I'm in the tournament half the time. And I know you guys have seen where you're like, wow, it's 11:30 and he hasn't caught anything yet. And usually I'm sitting on a really big one or something, and they suck me in, and then it becomes personal. And it's like, I'm going to either, I'm going to hook this fish. I don't know if I'm going to get it in, but I'm not leaving until I catch it. And man, it hurts you sometimes. And then, like, for instance, Harris Chain sat on that one for 3.5 hours and catch it. And it's like 11, and it was like, it made the day, but you just never know.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was going to bring up the Harris chain specifically. That fish took you a while, but what's I mean, every tournament's different. If you're on a Clark's Hill, the sized fish that you're side fishing for, maybe a 4-pounder that you stay on longer. In Florida, it's an 11-pounder. There was one at Seminole in the canal to Wingates with the tube in the back. You were this way for an hour, this way for an hour, and you didn't get it. And I was like, man, I've never seen John Cox get bested by a fish, but that happened. And so how big was that fish, do you feel, and what's your time cutoff? I feel like as you get later in the event, you know, you may be able to spend more time, but early in the event, you need to at least set a base weight and get a limit or something before.
Right. And that one was a tough one because we were all kind of fishing that same area, and it was like a 2, a 6, and like a 9 all in the same bed. And I was being super greedy, and I would get the 6-pounder to bite every once in a while. But as soon as the 6-pounder would get it, the 9 would fly in, and I would try to shake the 6 off for the 9 to get it. And yeah, I messed around too long. I accidentally caught the male, and it just all fell apart. But it was hard to leave because guys, you know, fighter trolls by, and he's like, "That's the biggest one I've seen," and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna sit here, you know, and it just seemed like it was gonna be such a easier catch.
I heard they're biting in the Chattahoochee if you want to head that way.
Yeah. But it just seemed like it was gonna be an easy one to catch, and it wasn't. It was a super hard one, and I had to pull the plug at like 12, which gave me about 3 hours to catch some fish, and luckily the next stop was really good, and I caught some fish.
And you ended up being on camera later in the event, so all good ends well. But did you check that 6, 9-pounder every day, or did you hear of anyone who did end up getting him to bite and weigh him in?
I think I might have went back the second day. I don't know if anybody caught it. I got a feeling that the 9, like when I left, the 6 just didn't want nothing to do with me anymore. It was staying way off the bed, and the 9, I didn't see it anymore. And I'm sure she slid down and went on another bed, and someone probably ended up catching her, or maybe not, but
she swam all the way to the place where Kyoya caught the 8-pounder.
I know. I thought that when I saw that video and I saw him catching under to the dock, I was like, oh, that's where she went. Because she was a lot bigger than anything else in there, you know? Like, it was one of those ones, you saw a lot of nice fish in there, but there was a couple where you're like, ooh, that's a 9, 10-pound fish. And yeah, he might have got it off that dock there.
This is just a question I was thinking about. I had heard a story, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or if this is like completely off base, but I'd heard a story from the Harris chain that somebody was fishing a real big fish that you were going to fish, and it might have even been the 11-pounder. Said person couldn't catch the fish, ended up putting the big motor on and like dusting out the entire bed so you couldn't see it. Has that ever happened to you? You don't have to say name wise, but does that like when you're fishing bed fishing tournaments, does stuff like that happen to like guard people from catching a certain fish?
I'm sure it's probably happened. I know a lot of times in practice, like, you know, you'll come into an area and then you'll see an area all muddied up and stuff. You're like, oh, there must have been a couple good ones here. You drop a waypoint on it, you know. But no, I can't. I know the one I can think of. I went to a big one, and what's his name was fishing for it. I can't remember, but he was fishing for it, and I had the camera with me, and he's like, and I was just sitting back, and I'm like, and the camera guy asked me, he's like, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, well, we're gonna either watch him catch that one, or we're gonna wait for him to leave, you know. And so we filmed him for a little bit, and I kind of just threw around right there, and you know, eventually the fish was gone, and he left, and I went up there, and it just wasn't happening, so we just moved on. But yeah, it's pretty crazy sometimes.
So this is the spawn cast. It seems the spawning podcast. But I will say, if you go into an event with a little bit of preconceived notions that there could be fish on bed, you dedicate a portion of your time fishing on the bank looking for them, you never find them. We've seen you adapt and adjust and have really good success on a fritz side, you know, swim jig, things like that. What's your go-to when it's so close, but either it's too dirty water-wise or they're just not there yet, and you don't just crap the bed? You know, you can still survive. What's John Cox's game plan?
Yeah. So I get sucked in. It's happened to me many times on the Hartwell Classic. I pulled the trigger a day early and tried to do the sight fishing thing, and it was so close, and it was I almost wanted to throw up. It was so close, and you knew like even hours from now it was going to be so good, and it's very hard to just, and those are my ones that when it's borderline, those are like my either hit the home run, or I'm like barely try to get in there. But most of the time, I really love throwing. I didn't realize how much I loved cranking until a couple years ago, and the Fritz side has played such a huge role, and I've done really well with it. And it's just more of a finessey crankbait, and I can throw it everywhere. It's very similar to the general where I can be in shallow water. I can throw it from anywhere from 6 inches to 4 feet, 5 feet, and so that bait's really I'm comfortable with it and stuff. And and also I like bladed jig. I throw it a ton, and I mean, honestly, I'll go through I already rigged up my 3 classic rods, and
Let's hear them.
I'm going. We got this new crankbait called the Dime. It's I don't know. I don't think I'm supposed to show it to you guys. Or I'll give you a little sneak peek of it.
There's all 3 of them right there. All 3.
Yeah, I got all 3 of them. So
he just did it this morning, March 7th.
So that's kind of the one. I don't know, but get an idea. It's it runs 5 to 6 foot. It's just got a little bit different, more of a wobble than the Fritz side does. And so I got that rigged up. I got a Fritz side rigged up, and then right here got the new slobber knocker on there. I'm gonna throw that a ton. And I've been putting the Max Scent jerk shad on the back, and man, that thing it just completely changes the action of that thing. Where it would just run straight. You put that jerk shad on, and it like bounces around really good. And those are like my 3 baits. I got that's what I'm with the way the weather, unless something extremely changes and it gets really warm, that's what I'll be throwing one of the days.
We know he's gonna have the spinning rod and generals in the other
box.
box.
Oh yeah. I don't know if it'll play out all.
That's one thing I was gonna ask. So I can remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like it was the Sam Rayburn. It was an FLW event, a Sam Rayburn event, where you had a camera in the boat for practice, and you went down just like a riprap bank with a crankbait, and like you were like making fun of it because you're like, I don't ever throw a crankbait. And here we are like a few years later, and it seems like anytime shallow cranking is like a deal, like you're somewhere to be found near the top. Like, how did that transition even happen? Going from like having no confidence in it to, like I said, now it's like anytime it plays, you'll play.
Right. It's a crazy story. So I went to get my boat wrapped, and I went fishing with Brad on Lake Murray, and he was like, it was nasty weather, 40 something degrees, and he wanted to go. And I'm like, man, that's like, we're not going to catch anything, like it's going to be, who wants to go out in the rain, 40 degrees. And man, we went out there and blasted them on the Fritz side. And I was kind of upset because I was like, gosh, I just now have these now, and they had them all last year, and I didn't throw them. And I was just going through the tournaments. I felt like I could have won if I would have had them. And, and I got to Rayburn, and just, it was the normal stuff. There was something, squirrel got into my brand new boat, built a nest in there, ate all the wires up. We had to pull it completely apart, so I missed all practice the first day. And it's just not going well, So the next day, Rob was like, hey, I'm going to film practice. And I was kind of down. So we got some breakfast, and then we got out there, and I was like, man, let's just go run some rock or whatever. And I was throwing the Fritz side, and he's filming, and I'm catching him like every cast. And I'm like, hey, I was like, cut that thing off. We don't want to show any more of this. And then I ended up winning the tournament doing it. It's just crazy. And it's just one of those things, I've always winded, swim jig or, bladed jig and stuff. And it just really, it just opened my eyes to like, I can throw it very similar to those things. The Fritz side comes through the rocks really well, and grass and stuff. And so it just kind of clicked for me.
That's interesting, because you don't get to practice with it in Florida. I mean, what are you going to crank the edge of a mat and Toho,
Yeah, no, it just seemed like from that point on, if it was cold, I was cranking, like I was like, hey, I'm going to, because a lot of times when it's cold, you get a lot of bites that would go so far on your spinner bait, your bladed jig, or swim jig or jig, whatever it is, you get a lot of fish slap it, that are either so full of eggs that they just can't swallow anything else, or just so full, or just because it's cold. And I really feel like that crankbait, I just catch so many more fish on it, and yeah, changed my life. Thanks, David.
It did. I'll say another place that changed your life was Lake Chickamauga. And so it's not the month of March. We're talking about the pattern of the month for March, but this is what you're thinking about in March going through the next few months. It seems like when the first fish of the year gets on bed, you're paying attention to it. And also when the last fish of the year are staying on bed and everyone else has transitioned to shad spawn, to offshore stuff, whatever, you're still looking at them. And we saw that at 2 Bassmaster Opens. You won in late April and then mid-May. Why is that lake? Why does it click with you so much during the spawn when there's so much fluctuation, when there's so many things you can do? How does it seem like you land on them all the time in such a hard place? Chickamauga is not easy. I remember coming there and being like, what's this lake all about? I mean, the size limit's big. It's not as easy as everybody thinks. There are giants there, but what's the deal? And then you go and win a couple sight fishing events every other year there, it seems.
Yeah, that place, it's a really special place where I just love how parts of the lake lay out, and like when I'm fishing there, I feel like I've fished there, and actually I have fished at I guess for 14 years now at Chick, so I've been there quite a bit. But I just not necessarily a spot, but a giant area, and I'm able to move around a lot, and it doesn't really matter if there's other people kind of in those areas, because some of the spots are so small. I imagine it is what some of the offshore spots are like, where guys pull in and it's just so specific areas throw. It's the same thing in some of that shallower water, where some of those fish will bed off the bank a little more than anybody else just going to. They wouldn't even know unless they went that far off the shoreline to where they're bedding out a little bit deeper. But yeah, that place is it's always been amazing. And I feel like it goes to the whole mental thing of, I'm like watching my kid hit the other day at softball. This is way off topic, but I'm watching her hit, and like, I already know when she's going to hit it. When she gets up and she does her warm up, I'm like, oh yeah, let me get the phone out, compared to when she gets up there and I'm like, oh no, this is going to go bad. Hopefully she gets drilled, or something gets off. But, I feel the same way at Chick. I get there, I'm excited on the drive there. I'm excited in practice, even if practice doesn't go well. So I'm just so just happy to be there that time of year and stuff. And I think it goes a long way, just when you're mentally in a good place like that.
So John, we always ask this during the pattern of the month. So I kind of want to split it up with you, because there's got to be somebody from like, somewhere northern enough to where the fish are not spawning in March. Right. It's going to get to this part of the podcast and just be completely pissed off that all we've done bed fishing. So I want to split it in half. Let's do your top 3 baits. Like if you're fishing in March for pre-spawners, and then after you get done with that, I want to hear your top 3 baits for like, fish are on beds and you can only have 3, like 3 apiece. We'll start with the pre-spawn baits.
Okay, so the pre-spawn baits, I'm gonna have to go with number 1 would be the Fritz side. Number 2 would probably be the War Pig, which is like like a rattle trap kind of bait. I like that smaller. They got like we have a 1/4 ounce one it casts a mile. It doesn't feel like a 1/4 ounce. You can throw it. I really love that one a lot. I throw it a lot.
Hartwell.
Yeah. That's that extremely shallow stuff where you're like, oh man, it's just too much. You dig the Fritz side in too much, and you can throw it in like, you can throw the thing in 6 inches if you want, and just rip it really fast. And I really like that one. And then probably number 3 would probably be it'd probably be a swim jig, or even if I can cast it, I throw the swim jig, I cast it, flip it, I do everything with it. And those would probably be my 3. I wish I knew more. Like, I wish I learned the jerk bait more. Like, there's a lot of really good baits that.
Don't worry about it. You do fine without
I know,
it. You do fine.
There's a lot of really good ones. We'll watch Hank Cherry catch them all the time and stuff. And that's like some of the stuff on my list where I'm like, hey, I need to, that's the kind of stuff I want to work on, and maybe in like, a lot of guys are throwing swim baits early, pre-spawn. There's a lot of stuff I want to try that I just never get around to. But my three would definitely be, War Pig,
Fritz side and the swim
the
jig.
swim jig, Fritz side.
So you said you don't like throwing white, or you don't throw white a bunch. Are you against Steve Kennedy's big white jig that he likes to swim, or do you swim a white jig too, or do you just like brim colored jigs?
Yeah, so my whole jig thing, I mean, that's a whole, we could go on forever about that, but my whole jig thing, I honestly, like, I start the colder weather ones, I start black and blue, as I feel like as the brim spawn starts to happen, and they're more targeting those bluegill, I go to like a bluegill color, and then shad spawn, I go to the white, but I mean, you got to think they're always eating bluegill, they're always eating shad. They're always, whatever they think the black one is, I don't know. But it's hard. Sometimes they do want the others, but that's what I try to base it off water temp too. Cold water, black one, middle range, bluegill, and then
everything gets more vibrant. Yeah, exactly. The black one probably is just like a shad that's got stuck in some snot grass and just is still swimming. That's probably
weeds. Yeah. I honestly, so I don't know. This might be way out there, but I honestly feel like the black one works so well when like the crappie come in. You get the black crappie come in, and they're like bedding right where the bass want to bed. So like the bass are coming in, chasing the black crappie around, and I feel like that's when they eat that. The black and blue one the best.
I can go with that. I can go with that.
Yeah. Hey, if you say it,
that's what goes on in my head, trying to figure it out there. It's always just mind blowing to me. A year after year, I'm always just like, are you kidding me?
I can see the YouTube videos now. Why John Cox says you need to throw a black jig, and all the kids will be like, "I caught him because there's crappie in this lake."
A bait that's been working for hundreds of years. We're just gonna come up with some revolutionary idea why black and blue works so well.
Yeah.
But give us in closing here, give us your top 3 spawning baits for those that obviously want to know about that. If you can only have 3.
And how you rig them and what tackle you use, because we see a spinning rod, but I know you use a bait caster too.
So honestly, to keep it as simple as I keep it, I mean, I'm a 6-inch general Texas rig spinning rod. I'm a 5-inch general wacky rig spinning rod. And then, I'll mix it up, and I'll either do a jig head with either a little trooper or super trooper crawl. That's been like, man, that bait there, I've been catching so many fish on that thing. I haven't really talked about it a ton because but then I feel guilty, and I'm like, yeah, super trooper crawl, it's just but that thing catches them, and I'll either put it on a jig or a drop shot. And I mean, those are like my 3. I'll mix the jerk shad in there some too, put it on the same setup that I have the Texas rig general on. And just but if I'm like twitching it, sometimes I just get tired of twitching the general, I'll go to a jerk shad. But that's about it. I mean, those are like my main 3. And I will rig up a bait caster with some 20-pound big game, 3/16 weight, and a 3/0 heavy cover Berkeley fusion hook. And I'll a lot of times, like, and that's when I see that big one there, and I'll put on a gilly in the 90 size. And that's been, I mean, this year I've caught, I don't know how many. I don't think I caught a 10 on it yet this year, but I've caught like multiple 9s on that gilly off the bed while I've been home. So that thing's been working really good.
So the one thing I was gonna say is a little surprising is last year all I kept hearing about was the Shape 108.
Yeah.
Are we going back to keeping it a secret, or what are we doing?
No. Shape 108. Yeah, I did throw that. That was the same thing I rigged up. So it's crazy you get on these kicks. Last year it was the Shape 108, 3/16 ounce weight, that same 3/0 heavy cover hook with the Shape 108 on the 20-pound big game. And in this year, I was just like, I wanted to like practice more with the gilly because I didn't really spend much time with it last year because it was Shape 108. And I started falling in love with throwing the gilly on the big ones. So I don't know. I got them all in there. I don't know what I'm gonna throw. It
It's
isn't.
dangerous when
That's
he starts using them all, Kyle. He's gonna have
yeah.
all of them, and
That
he's gonna every fish
Just
is
for
fun.
that's the problem. Like the all the thoughts going in my head, like when I see a big one, it's like, oh gosh, what am I gonna throw? Am I gonna throw the gilly? Am I gonna shape one up? Or maybe I should just catch it on spinning rod. I don't, it's terrible.
Just wait till he starts throwing a glide bait, Kyle. Everyone's screwed.
Oh,
Everyone's screwed.
hey, we got one coming. I've been throwing one. We got one coming at ICAST. It
Oh
is
no.
mind blowing. I was like, you just reel it, and they crush it. It's so cool.
Last thing before we let you go, the next event of the Bassmaster season is the Bassmaster Classic, the Mac Daddy. I know you want to win that one bad in a big way. I'm waiting for you to get your first Elite Series trophy as well. You've got plenty of open trophies back there. No pressure from me at all, but how would you grade your first two events? You made two cuts. You got 49th and 14th. Almost made the final day cut there at Seminole. Two events in Florida. John normally makes a top 10. You almost did, but you got out of there pretty unscathed. I mean, you're sitting good in points.
Yeah, I mean, Okeechobee it's always so hard because you always want more. You want to catch that 30-pound stringer. In the area I ended up fishing, I knew 30 pounds wasn't possible, and I knew like you'd max out 20, 21, 22, 23 pounds, which would have been great. But I'm greedy and I want to catch 30 something pounds. So I did a lot of bailing on stuff to try to make other stuff work. And then would scramble to just make it there. So I was happy that I got a check there because I made some really bad calls throughout every day of the tournament that didn't work out. But and in Seminole, the same thing. You want to win so bad. You know how key those two big fish are to catch those. And you have a massive sack the first day. So. But I was really pleased being able to recover. I was really down that first day at noon with one fish, and then to come back and be close to the top 10 was, I felt really good about it. And now that we're out of Florida, I'm even more excited because it seems like it goes a little better once we're out of Florida.
Yeah, you got more baits and more baits to your I guess arsenal. But
Yeah.
John, I appreciate you, man. Hey, the last time we were at the Tennessee River, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you got like third or fifth or something like that. It was a star-studded top 10. Not only did you have Gussie winning it, you had Kennedy right there, you, Hackney, Christie, Brandon Card, Hunter Schrock, I think John Cruz made it as well. Stacked top 10. Good luck in the Classic. We'll see you there. And obviously 21st in AOY, off to a great start this season.
All right. Thanks, Ronnie.